I didn't just touch the merchandise. I physically assaulted the Alpha King because I thought he was a malfunctioning special effect. As a Hollywood prop master, I've built dragons, aliens, and monsters that look terrifyingly real. So when I saw a massive midnight black wolf standing perfectly still in the garden of the Hayes estate, I didn't run. I didn't scream. I marched right up to him, annoyed that the production team had placed the animatronic off-center. I critiqued his fur density, complained about the synthetic texture, and then, to check the wiring, I firmly yanked his tail. I expected a mechanical click. Instead, I got a chest-vibrating roar and a very naked, very furious billionaire who looked at me like I was the first person in history to dare touch him without permission. And the worst part? I didn't apologize. I told him his volume was too loud. You are listening to Raven's Library. Quick question before we start. Where are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. I want to see how far this story is traveling. And if you want to be the first to hear what happens next, hit that join button to become a member. You'll unlock early access to future uploads and get exclusive badges to show off your status in the comments. Ready? Let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Glitchy Prop. I didn't hesitate. I didn't pause to admire the craftsmanship. I just reached out and yanked the tail. Cheap, I muttered, giving the thick black fur another sharp tug. I authorized the budget for yak hair and imported silicone, and they give me a synthetic blend? Unbelievable. I was already in a foul mood. The Hayes estate was hosting the most secretive, high-budget masquerade summit of the decade, and my reputation as the industry's leading practical effects specialist was on the line. I needed perfection. I needed atmosphere. What I didn't need was a prop that felt warm. I frowned, running my hand along the wolf's flank. The texture was incredible, I had to admit. Beneath the coarse guard hairs, there was a heat that radiated through my palm, almost like a living engine. The chest didn't just simulate breathing. It expanded with a rhythmic, powerful cadence that made the air around us vibrate. Okay. The pneumatics are top tier, I conceded, circling the massive beast. It stood nearly 5 feet at the shoulder, staring straight ahead with golden eyes that looked a little too glassy. But the blocking is terrible. You're supposed to be lurking in the shadows, not posing by the hydrangeas like a lawn ornament. I tapped the wolf's snout with my clipboard. Hey, reset into idle mode. You're scaring the caterers. The wolf blinked. I paused. Blinking wasn't in the code script I wrote. Glitched servo, I sighed, dropping my clipboard onto the grass. Great. Just great. Now I have to open the maintenance hatch. I walked around to the back of the beast. I assumed the access panel was located near the base of the spine, as was standard for quadrupedal animatronics. I grabbed the base of the tail with both hands, braced my boot against the wolf's hind leg for leverage, and pulled hard, expecting a panel to pop open. It didn't pop. It growled. It wasn't a mechanical grind of gears or a pre-recorded soundbite playing through a hidden speaker. This sound came from deep inside a biological chest, a low, thrumming resonance that rattled my teeth and vibrated through the soles of my combat boots. Then, the prop exploded. Shadows erupted from the fur, swirling like ink in water. The massive form twisted, bones cracking with a sickeningly organic wet snap that no machine could replicate. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes as the beast dissolved into smoke and reformed instantly into a man. He was massive, He was terrifying. And he was stark naked. He towered over me, 6'5" of corded muscle and golden skin, his chest heaving with rage. His eyes were still that piercing, inhuman gold, and his lips were pulled back to reveal teeth that looked far too sharp for a human mouth. He didn't cover himself. He didn't cringe. He loomed over me, radiating a heat that felt like a blast furnace. "Did you?" He snarled, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that sounded like rocks crushing together. "Just pull my tail." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my brain, wired for crisis management on chaotic movie sets, refused to process the danger. It processed the technicalities. "The transition speed was excellent," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "But you're breaking character. The script calls for a brooding, atmospheric presence, not a nudist colony audition." The man froze. The murderous rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a profound, baffled confusion. He took a menacing step toward me, encroaching on my personal space, until I had to crane my neck to look him in the eye. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he whispered, the threat dripping from every syllable. "I assume you're the lead method actor hired for the transformation sequence," I shot back, crossing my arms over my chest to show him I wasn't impressed by his physique, even if it was, admittedly, impressive. "And while I appreciate the commitment to the role, your audio gain is way too high. That roar registered at least 120 decibels. You're going to blow the guests' eardrums before the appetizers are served." He stared at me. For a long, silent moment, the wind rustled through the trees, and the man just stared at me as if I were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "My audio gain," he repeated slowly. "Yes, dial it back," I ordered, picking up my clipboard and dusting off a hydrangea petal. "And put some pants on. This is a black tie event, not a frat party." I turned on my heel to walk away, checking the time on my watch. I had 3 other props to inspect before the guests arrived. A heavy hand clamped onto my shoulder, stopping me dead. The grip was iron-hard, possessive, and electric. "I didn't dismiss you," he growled right into my ear, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. And that wasn't a costume. Chapter 2. Nice costume. I looked down at the hand on my shoulder. It was large, manicured, and radiating that same impossible, feverish heat I had felt on the wolf's flank. I didn't pull away immediately. Instead, my brain, trained to analyze prosthetics, latex, and mechanical armatures, did a rapid diagnostic. The skin texture was flawless, the pores were visible, the grip strength was calibrated perfectly to hold me without bruising, implying high-end servo motors underneath the dermis. "Impressive," I muttered, lifting my hand to tap his wrist. "I don't know who did the silicone casting for this bodysuit, but they deserve a raise. The seam work is invisible. Is it glued? Magnetic latches?" The man blinked, his golden eyes widening slightly. The intense predatory aggression that had been rolling off him in waves seemed to snag on my words. "Silicone casting. Don't play coy," I said, finally shrugging his hand off. I took a step back, crossing my arms. "You're obviously the client. Mr. Hayes, I presume? Or do the agencies send a stand-in for the rehearsal?" He stared at me. For a man who had just been a wolf 5 seconds ago, he looked remarkably human in his confusion. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick, filled only by the distant sound of the catering staff setting up glassware on the terrace. He looked at his own hand, flexing the fingers, then looked back at me with a slow, dawning fascination. "I am Benedict Hayes," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with the weight of a title. "And I assure you, Miss Bastian, Tess Bastian, your lead prop master. Miss Bastian," he continued, a corner of his mouth ticking upward.
This is not a bodysuit, and I am not a stand-in. Right, and I'm the Queen of England, I scoffed,
reaching into my back pocket for my laser tape measure. I aimed the red dot at his chest. Look, Mr. Hayes, I get it. You're rich, you're eccentric, and you want this masquerade summit to be immersive. But walking around naked in the garden to test the shock value on the staff? That's an HR nightmare waiting to happen. Not to mention it's chilly. He didn't cover himself. He didn't even shiver. He just took a step closer, walking right through the laser dot on his chest until he was looming over me again. The air around him smelled like ozone and expensive sandalwood. I don't feel the cold, he murmured, his voice dropping to a low rumble that made the hair on my arm stand up. And I don't care about HR. What I care about is that you pulled my tail. It was a quality control check, I defended, refusing to back down even though I had to crane my neck to maintain eye contact. If you're going to run around in a high-tech animatronic suit or whatever holographic rig you're using, it needs to be durable. Clearly, the audio sensors are too sensitive if a simple tug triggers a roar like that. He laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was a dark, jagged sound that sounded like it had edges. You think I'm a special effect. I think you're a billionaire with too much time and a very expensive toy, I corrected. Now, are we going to discuss the prop placement for the ballroom, or are you going to stand there showcasing your physique all afternoon? Before he could answer, a frantic rustling came from the hedges. A man in a sharp black suit, one of his security detail clearly, burst into the clearing, holding a plush charcoal robe. The guard took one look at Benedict, paled, and immediately averted his eyes to the ground, trembling slightly. Alpha, sir, the guard stammered, holding out the robe with shaking hands. We heard the roar. Is there a threat? Benedict didn't look at the guard. He kept his golden gaze locked on me. No threat, he said smoothly, taking the robe and sliding it on with a fluid, regal grace that hid the dangerous power of his body. He tied the sash, the velvet settling around him like a royal mantle. Just a critic. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space until I could feel the heat radiating off him through the heavy fabric. He leaned down, his lips inches from my ear. You have a sharp eye for detail, Miss Bastian, he whispered, but you're wrong about one thing. This isn't a toy. And I promise you, the batteries never run out. Chapter 3. The Consultant. I want to hire you. The words hung in the air of the Hayes Estate's massive library. I was sitting on a leather sofa that probably cost more than my entire college tuition, nursing a sparkling water. Benedict Hayes was standing by the fireplace, fully dressed now in a bespoke three-piece suit that fit him with suspicious perfection. He looked less like a wild animal now, and more like a CEO who ate competitors for breakfast. I'm already hired, I pointed out, setting my glass on a coaster. I'm the prop master for the summit. I have a contract. Tear it up, Benedict said, waving a hand dismissively. I have a new position for you. Private aesthetic consultant. I raised an eyebrow. Is that rich person speak for personal stylist? Because I don't do wardrobe. I build monsters. Exactly, he said, turning to face me. The firelight danced in his eyes, making them look molten. This summit, it's a unique gathering. My guests are, let's call them method actors. Very dedicated, very intense method actors. They are here to immerse themselves in a primal role-play experience. Wolves, specifically. I gathered that, I said dryly, given the howling I heard from the guest wing earlier. They take their roles very seriously. Benedict continued, pacing slowly across the Persian rug. Sometimes too seriously. They forget their humanity. They posture, they growl, they get aggressive. It ruins the elegance of the event. He stopped in front of me, leaning against the heavy oak desk. I saw how you handled me in the garden. You weren't afraid. You were critical. You looked at a beast and saw a flaw in the design. I saw a prop that needed calibration, I corrected. Precisely, he said softly. My guests need calibration. I want you to walk among them, manage the aesthetic. If they growl, correct them. If they posture, fix their blocking. Remind them that this is a civilized event, not a kennel. Make them look realistic. I stared at him. It sounded like the most absurd gig of my life. A bunch of billionaires playing werewolf in the woods, needing a babysitter to tell them to stop drooling on the upholstery? And the pay? I asked. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. I picked it up. My eyes widened. The number on the check had so many zeros I had to count them twice. This wasn't just good money. This was buy your own island money. That's for 1 week, he said. I looked up at him, suspicious. What's the catch? Do I have to clean up after them? The staff handles the mess, Benedict said, his voice dropping an octave. Your only job is to maintain the illusion. Treat them like bad actors. Do not let them intimidate you. Do not let them break character. If anyone steps out of line, you answer only to me. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me. The scent of sandalwood and ozone filled my lungs again. The intensity in his gaze was suffocating, heavy and electric. But there is one condition, Tess, he murmured, his face inches from mine. A clause I need you to agree to verbally. Which is? I breathed, unable to look away. You must never flinch, he said. No matter what they do, no matter how loud they roar, you do not show fear. The moment you show fear, the illusion breaks. Can you do that? I looked at the check. I looked at the arrogant, beautiful man who thought he could buy my nerve. I smirked. Mr. Hayes, I said, tucking the check into my pocket. I worked on the set of Zombie Apocalypse 4 with a hungover lead actor and a malfunctioning flamethrower. A bunch of guys in fur coats don't scare me. Benedict smiled. It was a slow, terrifying expression that showed just a hint of teeth. Good, he whispered. Then welcome to the pack. Chapter 4. The Den of Lions. The grand hall smelled like a locker room mixed with a thunderstorm. It was a heavy, musky scent that clung to the back of my throat, the smell of too many bodies, too much testosterone, and too much leather. I walked in with my clipboard held like a shield and my laser measure clipped to my belt. The room was cavernous, filled with dark wood, velvet drapes, and about 50 of the most intense-looking people I had ever seen, the method actors. Benedict hadn't been kidding about the commitment to the bit. The guests were clustered in groups, not chatting politely, but pacing. They circled each other. Some were leaning against the walls with a predatory stillness that made my skin crawl. Low rumbling sounds, growls, essentially, echoed from the corners of the room. Okay, I muttered to myself, uncapping my pen. Let's fix this blocking. I marched toward a group of men near the buffet. They were hunched over a platter of roast beef, tearing at the meat with their bare hands. Excuse me, I barked, clapping my hands sharply. The 3 men froze. They turned to look at me in unison. Their eyes were wild, dilated, and unnerving. One of them actually snarled, a wet, guttural sound that would have terrified a normal person. Posture!
I scolded, pointing my pen at the biggest one. You're slouching. You're supposed to be aristocratic shifters, not hyenas scavenging a carcass. Stand up straight. Use a fork. You're ruining the visual. The man blinked. The snarl died in his throat. He looked at his friends, confused, then slowly straightened his spine. He picked up a silver fork,
looking at it like he'd never seen cutlery before. Better, I said, making a note on my clipboard. Work on the table manners. It's unconvincing. I moved on, weaving through the crowd. Everywhere I went, the room seemed to bend around me. Eyes followed me. Hungry, curious, confused eyes. I ignored them. I adjusted a woman's shawl that was dragging on the floor. Trip hazard. Fix it. I told two men who were chest-bumping to take the homoerotic tension outside. And I rearranged a floral centerpiece that was blocking the sightlines. Then, I hit a wall. Literally. I turned a corner and walked smack into a chest that felt like a slab of granite. I stumbled back, adjusting my glasses. Standing in front of me was a man who looked like he ate gym equipment for fun. He had a scar running down his cheek, buzzed hair, and an energy that screamed violence. "Watch it," he growled. It wasn't a request. It was a threat. "You watch it," I countered, brushing imaginary dust off my jacket. "You're blocking the flow of traffic. Who are you supposed to be? The brooding antagonist?" The man, let's call him Scarface, narrowed his eyes. He leaned down, sniffing the air near my neck. "You smell like him," he rasped. "Why do you smell like the king?" "Personal space," I said, poking him in the chest with the end of my pen. "Back up. You're breaking the immersion. Alphas don't sniff people in public. It's tacky." Scarface's lip curled. A low growl started in his chest, vibrating clearly through the air. He grabbed my wrist, his grip bruising. "You have a loose tongue, little human. Maybe I should rip it out." The room went silent. The acting had stopped. This felt real. I didn't pull away. I didn't scream. I remembered the check in my pocket. I remembered the flamethrower on set. I reached into my tool belt and pulled out a spray bottle filled with water, usually used for wetting down hair or styling fabric. "Bad blocking," I said flatly. I sprayed him directly in the face. Squirt, squirt. Scarface gasped, releasing my wrist as the water hit his eyes. He stumbled back, sputtering, completely shocked. "What the hell?" he roared, wiping his face. "Aggression is reserved for the third act," I lectured, capping the bottle. "Reset to neutral. And go dry off. You're dripping on the parquet." I turned around to see Benedict standing on the balcony overlooking the hall. He was leaning against the railing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't intervening. He was watching me with a look of absolute, unholy delight. He raised his glass to me, his eyes glowing gold from across the room. I gave him a crisp salute and turned back to the stunned room. "All right, people," I shouted. "Let's tighten up the formation. Less growling, more mingling. Let's go!" But as I walked away, I felt a shift in the air. They weren't looking at me like a prop master anymore. They were looking at me like I was the only thing in the room dangerous enough to spray a rabid wolf in the face. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, the water bottle wasn't going to be enough for the next one. Chapter 5. The Measuring Tape. The adrenaline from spraying a billionaire in the face with tap water hadn't fully subsided when I found myself in an even more precarious position. Between Benedict Hayes's legs. Strictly professional, of course. "Spread your stance," I ordered, kneeling on the plush carpet of his private dressing suite. "You're locking your knees. If you lock your knees in a tuxedo, you'll faint, and I am not dragging 200 pounds of alpha male off the floor." Benedict stood on the low tailoring podium, looking down at me with an expression that was half amused, half tortured. He obeyed, shifting his feet apart. "I haven't fainted in 3 centuries, Tess, and I weigh 240. "Muscle density," I muttered, shaking out the yellow measuring tape. "Another reason to get the fit right. If the trousers are too tight in the thigh, you'll rip the seam the moment you sit down, and I don't have enough matching silk for a reprint." I reached around his left thigh to measure the inseam. It was a standard tailor's movement, quick, clinical, efficient. But the moment the back of my hand brushed against the inside of his leg, his entire body went rigid. A low, vibrating sound, almost like a purr, but far more dangerous, rumbled in his chest. I paused, looking up. "Stop twitching. You're throwing off the numbers." "I am not twitching," Benedict gritted out, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. He was staring at the wall as if it contained the secrets of the universe, refusing to look down at me. "You are hovering." "I am measuring," I corrected. I finished the leg and stood up, snapping the tape retract. "Turn around. I need the shoulder width." He turned slowly. I stepped in close behind him. He radiated heat like a furnace. It was distracting. Being this close to him felt like standing next to a high-voltage generator. The air hummed. I reached up, spanning the tape across his broad shoulders. He was impossibly wide, his physiology built for power, not aesthetics. "You're tense," I noted, pressing my thumbs briefly into his trapezius muscles to check the slope. "Drop your shoulders. You're carrying all your stress in your neck. The suit needs to drape, not hang." Under my hands, his muscles felt like steel cables. He didn't relax. Instead, he leaned back, just an inch, invading my space. "It is difficult to relax," he murmured, his voice dropping to that gravelly register that made my toes curl in my boots. "When you are touching me like that." "Like what?" I asked, moving around to face him. "Like a professional trying to do her job?" "Like you own me," he said softly. I froze. I looked up at him. He was looking down at me now, his golden eyes dark and dilated. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. "I don't own you, Mr. Hayes," I said, my voice sounding a little breathless despite my best efforts. "I'm just the hired help." "You are the only person in this house who isn't afraid to touch me," he countered. He took a half step forward on the podium, forcing me to tilt my head back further. "Everyone else flinches. You measure." I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to step back. "Well, someone has to make sure you look presentable." I raised the tape to measure his chest. I had to wrap my arms around him to pass the tape to my other hand. For a split second, I was effectively hugging him. I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a slow, heavy, powerful thud, thud, thud that seemed to sync with the beat of my own pulse. I tightened the tape. 48, I read, trying to keep my voice steady. Good lung capacity. I pulled the tape away and reached for his neck. Last one, collar size. I looped the cool plastic strip around his thick throat. My knuckles brushed against his pulse point. It was racing. I tightened the tape gently to get the read, my face inches from his chin. 18 inches, I whispered, focusing on the numbers. Thick neck, hard to fit. Benedict's hand came up, wrapping around my wrist. He didn't pull my hand away. He held it there, against his throat.
I could feel the vibration of his voice box against my skin. "Careful, Tess," he growled, and this time his eyes flashed with a predatory hunger that made my knees weak. "Don't pull too tight. I bite." Chapter 6. A Very Rare Steak. "That," I said, pointing my fork accusingly across the long mahogany table, "is a health code violation waiting to happen." We were dining in the private solar, a glass-walled room that overlooked the moonlit mountains. The setting was romantic, elegant, and serene. The food on Benedict's plate, however, looked like a crime scene. It was a steak, a massive 3-pound tomahawk ribeye, and it was blue. Not rare, blue. It was seared for maybe 10 seconds on each side,
leaving the inside cold, red, and practically still mooing. Benedict sliced into the meat with a sharp knife, the red juice pooling on the white porcelain. He didn't look bothered. He looked hungry. "It preserves the nutrients," he said smoothly, popping a piece of raw meat into his mouth and chewing with a relish that was slightly disturbing. "And I have a robust constitution. Salmonella is a concern for weaker species." "I'm eating risotto," I said, looking down at my safe, cooked vegetarian dinner. "Because I prefer my food dead. Fully, completely dead." Benedict chuckled, reaching for his wine glass. "You prefer control, Tess. That's why you work in props. You take reality, which is messy, unpredictable, and raw, and you replace it with silicone and latex because it's safe. You like things you can measure." I bristled. "I like things that make sense. Props don't lie. They don't have hidden agendas. They don't try to intimidate you. If a prop breaks, I can fix it with glue and gaffer tape. People aren't that easy." "No," he agreed, watching me over the rim of his glass. "People are messy. They have instincts, desires, hunger." He cut another piece of steak. The way he moved was hypnotic. Even eating, he possessed a lethal grace. He didn't hunch, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a focus in his eyes that suggested if I reached for his plate, I might lose a finger. "So," I said, trying to steer the conversation away from his predatory dining habits, "why the masquerade? Why the wolf theme? Is it just a rich guy fetish? Let's all pretend to be apex predators for a weekend." Benedict paused. He set his knife down. "For most of my guests, it is not a pretense. They spend their lives in boardrooms, wearing suits, smiling at people they want to kill. This summit is the only place they can let the mask slip. They can run. They can howl. They can be what they are." "And what are they?" I asked. "Really?" "Animals," he said softly. "Territorial, possessive, dangerous animals trapped in polite society." "And you?" I asked. "Are you trapped, Benedict?" He looked at me then. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. "I was, until recently." "What changed?" "I found a new distraction." He picked up his knife again. The silver glinted in the candlelight. He looked at me, and for a second, I felt like I was the steak. "You think you can measure everything, Tess," he said low in his throat. "You think you can quantify the world with your tape measure and your clipboard. You think if you stand up straight and use a stern voice, you can organize chaos." "I sprayed a billionaire in the face today," I reminded him. "I think my methods work." He smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf in the garden. "You suppressed an instinct," he corrected. You didn't control it. You can't control nature, Tess. You can't control me. Is that a challenge? I asked, leaning forward, my competitive streak flaring up. It's a warning, he replied, slicing the meat with a sharp snick against the china. Because eventually, the prop master has to leave the set, and when the cameras stop rolling, the monsters are still there. Chapter 7. The Scent. By the next afternoon, I was convinced I needed to change my laundry detergent. I was walking down the East Wing corridor, carrying a stack of revised seating charts, and the Red Sea effect was in full force. Groups of guests, imposing men and elegant women who looked like they owned half of Europe, literally parted as I approached. But it wasn't just that they moved, it was how they moved. They didn't step aside politely. They backed away, eyes wide, nostrils flaring, tracking my movement with a mixture of wariness and confusion. "Morning," I chirped at a duo of 6-foot-tall models near the staircase. They didn't answer. They pressed themselves against the wall, heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. One of them whispered something that sounded like "unmarked." I sniffed my shoulder. I smelled like the lavender soap provided by the estate and, well, Benedict. I'd spent the last 3 hours in his office, reviewing the gala logistics. He had a habit of invading my personal space, leaning over my shoulder to read a document, handing me pens, borrowing my stapler, draping his suit jacket over the back of my chair. It must be the industrial adhesive, I muttered to myself. Maybe the fumes are stronger than I thought. I turned the corner toward the ballroom and nearly collided with a woman who refused to move. It was Claudia. I recognized her from the dossier Benedict had given me. Claudia Mercer, CEO of a global shipping conglomerate. High status, rumored to be Benedict's top choice for a strategic partnership, whatever that meant in billionaire speak. She was stunning, in a terrifying Ice Queen sort of way. She wore a red silk dress that looked like it cost more than my life, and she was blocking the double doors with her arms crossed. "You," she said. Her voice was cold, smooth, and dripped with disdain. "Me," I agreed, checking my clipboard. "Claudia, right? Can I help you? If you're looking for the spa, it's on the 2nd floor." She didn't blink. She stepped into my space, leaning down to sniff the air around my neck. It was invasive and weirdly aggressive. "You reek," she sneered, pulling back with a look of disgust. "You reek of him. It's suffocating." "I reek of efficiency," I corrected, stepping back. "And if you're referring to Mr. Hayes's cologne, yes, it's potent. We've been working in a small office. Ventilation is an issue." Claudia laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You think this is about cologne? You stupid little human. He has smeared his scent all over you. He has marked you like a piece of property, like a favorite chew toy." I paused. Marked me? "Mr. Hayes doesn't mark people," I said, keeping my voice level. "He hires them, and currently he's hired me to ensure this event runs smoothly, which means I need to get through these doors." "He's playing with you," Claudia hissed, her eyes narrowing. "He's bored. He finds your ignorance amusing. But don't mistake his amusement for affection. When he tires of the game, he will discard you. And if you think you can walk around this summit smelling like the Alpha King without consequences, you are mistaken." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a growl that vibrated in her chest. "Stay away from the inner circle events, human, or I might forget my manners and show you what we do to trespassers." I gripped my clipboard tighter, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't method acting. The look in her eyes was pure, unadulterated hatred. "Thanks for the tip," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "But I have a job to do, and unless you're going to help me hang streamers, you're in my way." I pushed past her. She didn't stop me, but I could feel her glare burning a hole in my back. As the doors swung shut behind me, I realized two things. One, Benedict had been doing something to me without my permission, and two, I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a target. Chapter 8. The Prop Malfunction. "Safety cables," I muttered, shielding my eyes against the glare of the stage lights. I specifically asked for the triple-braided steel safety cables, and these looked like they were bought at a discount hardware store. I was standing in the center of the grand ballroom, staring up at the massive crystal chandelier that dominated the ceiling. It was the centerpiece for the final masquerade ball, a glittering monstrosity of glass and iron that weighed as much as a small car. I was currently debating with the venue manager, a nervous man named Arthur who seemed terrified of his own shadow. "Mr. Hayes insisted on the aesthetic," Arthur squeaked, wringing his hands. "He said the thicker cables ruined the refraction of the light." "Mr. Hayes isn't a structural engineer," I snapped, jotting a furious note on my clipboard. "And unless he wants his guests to be flattened by 2 tons of crystal, we are reinforcing this rig. Get the lift." I turned to walk toward the control booth to cut the power. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Benedict. He was standing on the mezzanine balcony, easily 50 feet away and 20 feet up. He was engaged in a tense conversation with a group of older men, the council, presumably. He looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, his posture rigid, his attention seemingly focused entirely on the politics of the moment. I took 2 steps toward the booth. Snap. The sound was like a gunshot. It echoed through the cavernous room, sharp and metallic. I froze. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a load-bearing bolt shearing off under stress. I looked up. The primary chain holding the chandelier had given way. The massive fixture tilted, groaned, and then plummeted. Directly toward me. It takes gravity about 1.5 seconds to pull an object of that mass from that height to the floor. In that time, the human brain can process the danger, but the human body cannot usually react fast enough to clear the impact zone. I had time to gasp. I had time to flinch. I did not have time to run. I braced for the impact, squeezing my eyes shut. Whoosh! There was no impact. Instead, there was a violent rush of air, a blur of motion that defied physics, and a hard, unyielding impact against a solid body, not the floor. I was tackled, lifted off my feet and slammed sideways, skidding across the polished parquet floor. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of gold and black. Crash! The chandelier hit the spot where I had been standing a microsecond ago. The sound was deafening, an explosion of shattering crystal and twisting metal that sent shards of glass flying like shrapnel. Silence followed, ringing in my ears. I was lying on the floor, breathless, pinned beneath a heavy, warm weight. I opened my eyes. Benedict was hovering over me, his body acting as a human shield against the debris. His arms were bracketed on either side of my head, his face inches from mine. He wasn't panting. He wasn't sweating. His heart was beating, fast, yes, but his breathing was controlled. I stared at him, my brain trying to reboot. "You were..." I gasped, coughing as the dust settled. "You were on the balcony." "I jumped," he said, his voice tight. "You were 50 feet away," I whispered, my shock turning into suspicion. "And 20 feet up. You didn't just jump. You teleported." I didn't even see you move. Benedict's eyes were wild. The gold irises were swirling, glowing with an internal light that dimmed slowly as he regained control. He looked down at me, checking me for injuries with a desperate intensity. Adrenaline. He lied. It was a terrible lie. The body is capable of remarkable feats under stress. That wasn't stress, I argued, trying to push him off, but he was immovable. That was impossible. You moved faster than the drop speed of a 2-ton object. That requires velocity that would shatter human bones. I drink a lot of protein shakes, he said, his expression closing off. He stood up, pulling me with him in one fluid motion. He dusted off my shoulders, his hands lingering on my arms. He seemed to be checking for broken bones, his touch firm and possessive. Are you hurt? He demanded, ignoring my physics lecture. No, I said, looking over his shoulder at the decimated chandelier. But I was right about the cables. I looked back at him. Benedict, seriously, how did you do that? He leaned in close, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the pulse point behind my ear. I told you, Tess, I'm not a prop. I don't work by your rules. He turned and walked away before I could ask another question, barking orders at the terrified staff. But as I watched him go, I noticed something. He had landed on his knees from a 20-foot drop to save me. There wasn't a scratch on his suit, and the marble floor where he had landed, it was cracked. Chapter 9. The Late Night Call. Insomnia is an occupational hazard. When you spend your life worrying about continuity errors, glue drying times, and union breaks, your brain forgets how to shut down. It was 2 a.m. The estate was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of a mountain thunderstorm battering the windows. I gave up on sleep, wrapped myself in a silk robe I'd found in the guest wardrobe, and padded down to the library in search of a book. Or whiskey. I found both. And I found Benedict. He was standing by the massive bay window, staring out into the darkness. The only light in the room came from the dying embers of the fireplace and the occasional flash of lightning. He held a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand, but he wasn't drinking. He was just vibrating. Even from across the room, I could feel the tension rolling off him. It wasn't the angry tension of the ballroom. It was a lonely, restless energy. You're going to burn a hole in the glass if you keep staring like that, I said softly. He didn't startle. He didn't turn around. I heard your heartbeat at the top of the stairs, he murmured. You walk quietly, Tess, for a human. I walked into the room, ignoring the "for a human" comment. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the chandelier. He turned then. In the firelight, he looked exhausted. Not physically. He looked as perfect as ever, but his eyes were heavy. I should have inspected the rigging myself. It was my fault. It was a faulty bolt, I said, moving to the wet bar to pour myself a glass of water. And you saved me. So we'll call it even. I walked over to him. He was tall, imposing, and yet he looked strangely isolated. Why are you awake, Benedict? Do billionaires not need sleep? The storm, he said, looking back out the window. The pressure drop. It makes the wolf restless. It wants to run. So go for a run, I suggested, lean against the window frame next to him. You have 3,000 acres of forest. Put on your costume and go howl at the moon. Isn't that what this summit is for? He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. A king cannot run like a pup, Tess. I have to stay here. I have to maintain the perimeter. I have to watch for threats. That sounds lonely, I said honestly. He looked at me. It is. He took a step closer to me. The space between us shrank. The air grew heavy, charged with the static of the storm and something else, something distinctly biological. You are the first person in a century who hasn't asked me for a favor, he said quietly. You ask me for budget approvals. You ask me for measurements. But you don't ask for power. I have my own power, I said, tilting my chin up. I can build entire worlds out of styrofoam and paint. What do I need yours for? He smiled then, a genuine soft smile that transformed his face. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. His skin was hot, burning against the cool air of the library. You smell like rain, he whispered, leaning down. And fear. You were scared today. I almost died, I whispered back, my breath hitching. Fear is a rational response. I won't let you die, he vowed, his voice dropping to a growl. I would burn this world down before I let anything touch you. He was close now. So close I could see the flecks of amber in his gold eyes. His gaze dropped to my lips. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud enough for him to hear. I wanted him to kiss me. I wanted to know if the heat he radiated tasted as dangerous as it felt. He leaned in. I closed my eyes, tilting my head back. I felt his breath on my lips, hot and scent-heavy. Then he froze. A low, tortured sound ripped from his throat. He jerked back as if he had been burned. No, he rasped, turning away from me abruptly. I can't. I opened my eyes, confused and stinging from the rejection. Benedict? Go to bed.
Tess, he ordered, his voice harsh, his back to me. His hands were gripped white-knuckled on the windowsill.
Leave. Now. Before I do something we both regret.
I started, hurt flashing through me.
Go!
He roared. I flinched. I turned and ran from the library, leaving him alone with his storm. I didn't see him grip the wood so hard that it splintered into dust under his fingers. Chapter 10. Claudia's Plot. The next morning, the air in the estate was brittle. Benedict was nowhere to be found. The staff whispered that he was in a closed-door session with the council and was in a foul mood. I poured my third cup of coffee and tried to focus on the floral arrangements for the final gala, but my mind kept replaying the scene in the library, the almost kiss, the rejection, the roar. Rough night? I looked up. Claudia was standing on the other side of the prep table. She wasn't sneering today. She was smiling. It was a terrifying smile. Too many teeth, not enough warmth. Just busy, I said, keeping my tone professional. Can I help you, Claudia? Actually, yes, she said, picking up a rose and twirling it between her fingers. She snapped the head off the flower with a casual flick of her thumb. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. The sniffing, the comments, nerves, you understand. The summit is high stakes for all of us. I didn't buy it for a second, but I nodded. Apology accepted. Is there something you need? I need your expertise, she said smoothly. We are holding a technical rehearsal for the opening ceremony of the Grand Masquerade tonight. Just the inner circle. We want to test the lighting and the acoustics for the transformation sequence. Benedict didn't mention a rehearsal, I said, checking my schedule. Benedict is busy with the council. Claudia waved a hand dismissively. He asked me to handle the preliminary walkthrough. He wants you to check the sightlines. He said you have an eye for detail. She paused, her eyes gleaming with malice I couldn't quite place. Unless, of course, you're not up for it. It can be intense. My pride flared. I can handle it. Where and when? The West Ballroom.
10 minutes. Come alone. We don't want the catering staff to see the special effects before the main event." "Fine," I said, grabbing my radio and my clipboard. "I'll be there." It made sense, logically. If they were doing a method acting rehearsal, they would want privacy. And it was my job to make sure the lighting hit their marks. I wasn't going to let a little romantic rejection keep me from doing my job. I walked to the West Ballroom. It was a separate wing of the estate, older and more Gothic than the rest. The hallway was dimly lit. I reached the double oak doors. They were heavy, carved with intricate wolves snarling at the moon. I pushed them open and stepped inside. The room was pitch black. No work lights, no windows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the vast empty space. "Claudia? I need some house lights if you want me to check the sight lines." Slam. The heavy doors slammed shut behind me. I spun around, grabbing the handle. Locked. "Claudia!" I shouted, pounding on the wood. "This isn't funny!" From the darkness behind me, a low, collective sound emerged. It wasn't a mechanical hum. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was breathing. Dozens of lungs, inhaling and exhaling in unison. And then, the unmistakable sound of claws skittering on stone. "Lights!" Claudia's voice echoed from a speaker overhead, cold and amused. "Let's see how the prop master handles a scene without a script." A single spotlight clicked on in the center of the room. It didn't illuminate me. It illuminated the 20 figures standing in a circle around me. They weren't wearing masks, and they weren't smiling. They were shifting. Chapter 11. The Masquerade Begins. The spotlight hummed, a high-pitched whine that grated against the sudden, suffocating silence of the West Ballroom. I stood in the center of the circle, clutching my clipboard like a shield, my heart doing a frantic tap dance against my ribs. "Okay," I said, my voice echoing slightly. I hated how small it sounded. "Very atmospheric, Claudia. You've nailed the creepy cult vibe. But if this is a technical rehearsal, I need more ambient light. I can't check the safety hazards if I can't see the floor." No one answered. The 20 figures surrounding me didn't move. They were dressed in formal wear, tuxedos, evening gowns, but their posture was wrong. They were hunched, their spines curved in a way that should have been uncomfortable for a human. Their heads were lowered, eyes tracking me from beneath furrowed brows. I raised my radio to my lips. "Control booth? Arthur? Can we cut the dramatic spot and give me a full wash, please?" Static. Just a wall of white noise. "Jamming devices?" I muttered to myself, clipping the radio back to my belt. A bit excessive for a party, isn't it? I took a step toward the nearest figure, a tall man in a velvet dinner jacket. "Hey, you. You're hitting your mark, but you're too stiff. Relax the shoulders. You look like you're about to snap." The man didn't relax. He twitched. A ripple of movement rolled under the skin of his neck, like a snake moving beneath a carpet. I stopped. I blinked. I adjusted my glasses. "Nice prosthetic," I said, though my stomach gave a weird lurch. "Subdermal pneumatics? I didn't see that on the manifest. Who's the vendor?" From the shadows beyond the spotlight, Claudia's voice drifted out, smooth and mocking. "No vendor, Tess. All natural." "Right," I scoffed, turning in a slow circle to try and locate her. "And I suppose the growling is natural too? You've got hidden speakers in the floorboards, bass transducers. I can feel the vibration in my shoes. It's a cheap trick, Claudia. Effective, but cheap." "You really don't get it, do you?" Claudia stepped into the edge of the light. She looked radiant and cruel, holding a champagne flute. You cling to your little explanations, wires, glue, speakers. You're so desperate for the world to be small and manageable. I'm desperate for a lighting plot that makes sense, I snapped, my patience fraying. Look, if you guys want to play eyes wide shut, that's fine. But I have a job to do. So unless you're going to start dancing, I'm leaving. I marched toward the gap between two of the actors. They moved. Fast. In a blur of motion that was definitely not human, they closed ranks, blocking my path. A low, collective growl rose from the circle. It wasn't coming from the floorboards. It was coming from their throats. I backed up, retreating to the center of the spotlight. The air in the room was getting hot, humid and heavy with the scent of musk and wet dog? No, it was sharper than that. It smelled like electricity and raw meat. "Blocking violation!" I yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the man in the velvet jacket. "Personal space! Back off!" "They can't help it," Claudia laughed, the sound bouncing off the stone walls. "The instinct is taking over. The prey is in the trap." "I am not prey!" I shouted, feeling for the laser measure in my pocket, my only weapon. "I am the staff, and I am reporting this to HR." "HR?" Claudia threw her head back and laughed. "Oh, you sweet, stupid thing. There is no HR here. There is only the pack. And tonight, we're shedding the costumes." She raised her hand. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly, popping my ears. The figures around me groaned, clutching their heads, their chests, their arms. Then came the sound. Crack. It wasn't a sound effect. I know sound effects. I know the sound of celery snapping to mimic a broken bone. This was wet. This was loud. The man in the velvet jacket fell to his knees. His tuxedo shirt ripped open down the back, not at the seam, but through the fabric itself, as his spine bowed and expanded. My breath caught in my throat. That's a lot of latex," I whispered, my brain frantically trying to find the logic.
"That's a bladder system. It has to be."
Chapter 12. The Reveal. "Shift," Claudia commanded. Chaos erupted. The circle of elegant billionaires dissolved into a nightmare of twisting limbs and tearing fabric. I watched, paralyzed, as a woman in a sequined gown fell forward, her hands elongating, her fingers fusing, and dark claws bursting through the manicured nails. Her jaw unhinged with a sickening pop, pushing forward into a muzzle. "No," I whispered, backing away until I bumped into someone behind me. I spun around. The man in the velvet jacket was gone. In his place was a creature, half man, half wolf, hunched over, panting. His eyes were yellow and dilated. Patches of fur were sprouting rapidly across his face. "It's CGI," I heard myself say, my voice trembling. "It's a holographic projection. It's mirrors." I reached out, compelled by a horrified curiosity, and touched the creature's arm. It was hot. Burning hot. The fur was coarse and oily. The muscle underneath twitched violently. You can't touch a hologram. "Oh my God," I breathed. The clipboard slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. The sound seemed to trigger them. 20 pairs of glowing eyes snapped toward me. The growling intensified, becoming a deafening cacophony of snarls. They weren't attacking, not yet, but they were closing in, driven by the agitation of the shift. "Benedict!" I screamed. I didn't mean to. It was a reflex. Boom. The double doors of the ballroom didn't just open, they exploded inward. Wood splinters rained down like confetti. Benedict stood in the frame. He was terrifying.
He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway, revealing a chest heaving with exertion. But it was his face that stopped my heart. His eyes were fully gold, no whites, just molten, burning pools of power. His canines had descended, sharp and white over his bottom lip. He didn't look like the billionaire who ate raw steak. He looked like a warlord. "Get away from her!" The voice wasn't human. It was a roar that carried a physical force, a shockwave that slammed into the gathered wolves. They whined, covering their ears, cowering back. Claudia, standing in the corner, didn't cower. She smirked. "You can't stop the instinct, my king. Look at her. She knows." Benedict's gaze locked onto mine. He stepped into the room, and with every step, the air distorted around him. The pressure was immense. I fell to my knees, the gravity of his presence literally pushing me down. He looked at the wolves surrounding me, and his control snapped. "Mine!" he roared. I watched as his shirt shredded. It didn't rip, it disintegrated under the force of his muscles expanding. His skin darkened, fur erupting along his arms and neck. He didn't go full wolf. He stayed in that terrifying middle ground. The Krynos, the monster. He stood 7 feet tall now, claws the size of steak knives extending from his hands. He swiped at the air, and the remaining wolves scrambled back, terrified of his dominance. He cleared the circle in seconds. Then he turned to me. He stood there, panting, a monster from a horror movie, a beast of shadow and gold. There was no mask, no animatronics, no wires. I looked up at him. I saw the scar on his shoulder. I saw the way he held his left hand, slightly curled. It was Benedict. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. He looked down at me, his chest heaving, waiting. He was waiting for the scream. He was waiting for me to run. The look in his golden eyes wasn't anger anymore. It was devastation. He thought he had lost me. Chapter 13. The Standoff. The room was silent, save for the ragged breathing of 20 partially shifted werewolves and the hum of the spotlight that still mercilessly illuminated the center of the floor. I stayed on my knees. My brain was doing something strange. It wasn't screaming, it was rewinding. I saw the wolf in the garden, the tail pull. I saw the raw steak at dinner, the protein. I saw the impossible jump to save me from the chandelier, the speed. I felt the heat of his skin, the metabolism. It wasn't magic. It was biology. It was physics. It was just biology I hadn't studied yet. Well, Claudia's voice cut through the silence, dripping with triumphant venom. Go on then. Run, little mouse. Run from the big bad wolf. See? I told you. He's a monster. Benedict flinched. The massive, fur-covered creature that was the Alpha King actually flinched at her words. He took a half-step back, his claws retracting slightly, his head lowering in shame. He couldn't look at me. He was looking at the floor, waiting for the rejection. I looked at Claudia. She was smiling, expecting me to faint or flee, which would force Benedict to chase me or exile me. She wanted the drama. She wanted the tragedy. I looked back at Benedict. He was terrifying. He was lethal. He could snap me in half with one hand. But he was also the man who let me measure his inseam without complaining. He was the man who ate dinner with me because he was lonely. He was the man who jumped from a balcony to save me from a falling chandelier. And right now, his shirt was ruined. I took a deep breath. I pushed myself up from the floor. My legs were shaking, but I forced them to lock. The sound of my combat boots scuffing the stone floor was loud in the silence. Benedict's head snapped up. His golden eyes widened. He braced himself, muscles bunching,
expecting me to bolt for the door. I didn't walk toward the door. I walked toward him. A collective gasp went through the room. The other wolves watched, stunned. I stopped 2 feet away from him. I had to crane my neck all the way back to look him in the face. He was towering over me, a wall of muscle and fur. "Benedict," I said. My voice was shaky but clear. He let out a low, warning rumble, not threatening me, but warning me to stay back for my own safety. "Tess, go." The voice was distorted, guttural. I ignored him. I reached out. I saw his eyes track my hand. He looked terrified that I was going to touch him, terrified that if I touched the monster, I would finally realize how wrong this was. I didn't touch his face. I didn't touch his claws. I reached for the tattered remains of his collar, which was hanging by a thread around his massive, fur-covered neck. I smoothed the fabric. "You really need to stop ruining your clothes," I whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. "I can fix a hem, Benedict. I can't fix shredded silk. Do you know how much this fabric costs per yard?" Benedict froze. He stopped breathing. The golden fire in his eyes flickered, confusion warring with the instinct. "Tess?" he rasped. "And your posture," I continued, fighting the urge to cry, fighting the urge to scream, and channeling every ounce of my professional obsession into this one moment. "You're hunching again. An alpha king stands straight, even when he's having a bad hair day." I looked him dead in the eye. "Now, are you going to eat me? Or are we going to get you a robe?" The silence stretched, and then the monster blinked. Chapter 14. The Verdict. The monster didn't roar. He didn't strike. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that rattled deep in his oversized chest. The golden fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that was far more disarming than the claws. "A robe," he repeated, the words grinding out of his distorted vocal cords like stones rubbing together. "You want to get me a robe?" "Well, I can't exactly walk you out through the main hallway like this," I said, my voice gaining strength as the prop master part of my brain took the wheel. "We have investors in the lobby. Nudity is not on the manifest." Benedict closed his eyes. The change happened fast. It wasn't the smoke and mirrors trick I'd seen in the garden. This was visceral. Bones realigned with wet snaps, fur receded into skin, and the massive bulk of the predator condensed back into the lean, lethal form of the man. He sank to his knees, his head bowing forward until it rested against my stomach. He was shaking. The Alpha King, the billionaire, the apex predator, he was trembling against me. "I thought you would run," he whispered, his voice human again, though rough with exhaustion. "I thought you would scream." "I considered it," I admitted, my hands hovering over his bare shoulders before finally, tentatively resting on his skin. It was burning hot. But then I remembered you owe me a paycheck, and I don't leave a job site until I get paid. Benedict let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in the fabric of my shirt. It wasn't a sexual embrace. It was an anchor. He was holding on to me like I was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Touching," Claudia drawled from the shadows. The moment shattered. Benedict went rigid against me. I looked up. Claudia was standing by the control panel, her face twisted in a mask of fury. The other shifters in the room were still hunched, watching us with wary, confused eyes. They had expected bloodshed. They got a hug. "It's pathetic," Claudia spat, stepping into the spotlight.
Look at him, the alpha of alphas, kneeling before a human. A weak, fragile little human who doesn't even know what she is standing next to. She isn't a queen, Benedict. She's a pet. And the moment she realizes what life with us really means, the violence, the hunger, the centuries of blood, she will break. She looked at me, her eyes flashing red. Leave him, girl. Walk away. You don't belong here. I looked down at Benedict. He was starting to rise, the rage rolling off him in waves, ready to tear Claudia apart. I pressed my hand firmly onto his shoulder, signaling him to stay down. You know, I said, addressing Claudia calmly,
You talk a lot about strength and power, but all I see is a woman who spent a lot of money on a dress just to stand in the dark and bully people. I stepped out of Benedict's embrace and walked toward her. The other wolves parted for me. Maybe it was confidence, or maybe it was the fact that the Alpha King was watching my every move with murder in his eyes. I might be human, I said, stopping a foot away from her. I might be fragile, but I'm the only one in this room who didn't need to turn into a monster to make a point. Claudia's jaw tightened. You have no idea. I have an idea, I cut her off. I think the rehearsal is over, and I think you're fired. Claudia scoffed. You can't fire me. I am a council member. She can. Benedict's voice cut through the air like a whip. He stood up. He was naked, dusty, and terrifying. He walked to my side, not looking at Claudia, but looking at the pack. The lady is the aesthetic consultant, Benedict said, his voice flat and deadly. She says the rehearsal is over. Clear the room. The command hit the air with physical force. The wolves didn't hesitate. They scrambled for the back exits, tails tucked, terrified. Benedict turned to Claudia. Get out of my sight, before I forget that I am a civilized man. Claudia looked at him, then at me. She saw the way he stood, slightly in front of me, shielding me, his body angled to take a bullet or a claw meant for me. She realized she hadn't exposed a weakness. She had exposed a bond. She turned and fled. We were alone. The silence was heavy. I looked at Benedict. So, I said, my knees finally starting to give out. About that robe. Chapter 15. Fix your tie. The walk back to the private suite was a blur. Benedict had wrapped a velvet curtain around his waist, a look that would have been ridiculous on anyone else, but somehow looked regal on him, and practically carried me up the service stairs. Once we were inside the safety of his rooms, the adrenaline crashed. I sat on the edge of the massive bed, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The reality of what I had seen, the shifting bones, the fur, the claws, was finally catching up to my logical brain. My prop master denial was gone. Magic, or biology, or whatever this was real. Benedict was pacing. He had pulled on a pair of sweatpants but remained shirtless. He looked like a caged tiger, moving back and forth, running his hands through his hair. I should have told you, he muttered, turning at the fireplace and pacing back. I planned to tell you, tonight, after the ball, over wine, in a controlled environment, not like that, not in a trap. You lied, I said. My voice was quiet. He stopped. He looked at me, pained. I didn't lie. I omitted. You let me spray a werewolf with a water bottle, I pointed out, a hysterical giggle bubbling up in my throat. Do you know how dangerous that was? He could have eaten my face. He wouldn't dare, Benedict growled, stepping toward me. He knew you were mine. They all knew. That's why they were terrified of you.
You were walking around with the Alpha King's scent on you, ordering them to fix their posture. It was the most magnificent thing I have ever seen. He knelt in front of me, taking my shaking hands in his. His skin was still so warm. Tess, I am sorry. I am sorry I scared you. I am sorry I put you in danger. I wasn't scared of you, I said, looking into his gold eyes. I was scared of the situation. But when you shifted, when you roared at them? Yes, he asked, bracing himself. I felt safe, I whispered. Is that crazy? A monster bursts into the room, and my first thought was, oh good, management is here. Benedict laughed. It was a genuine sound of relief. He leaned his forehead against my knees. You are not normal, Tressa Bastion. I'm professional, I corrected. And speaking of professional, we have a problem. Claudia? No, the gala. It starts in 20 minutes. You are half naked. I look like I've been in a mosh pit, and we have 300 guests waiting for the grand entrance. Benedict looked up. I don't care about the gala. We can leave. We can take the jet, go to Paris, go somewhere no one knows us. And let Claudia win? I shook my head, standing up. Absolutely not. I spent 3 days rigging that lighting system. I am not letting a little thing like a supernatural revelation ruin my event. I walked to his closet and threw the doors open. Put on the backup tuxedo, the navy one. It hides the wolf hair better. Benedict stood up, watching me with an expression of absolute awe. You want to go back down there? I don't want to, I said, grabbing a fresh shirt and tossing it to him. But if we don't show up, they win. They think I'm weak. They think I ran away. I turned to the mirror and fixed my hair, smoothing down my blazer. I looked pale, but my eyes were fierce. I am the prop master, I told my reflection. I control the scene, and I say the show goes on. I turned back to Benedict. He was buttoning his shirt, his eyes locked on me. Fix your tie, I ordered, walking over to him. He stopped, his hands falling to his sides. He let me do it. I reached up, my fingers deft and quick, tying the silk into a perfect Windsor knot. I smoothed the lapels of his jacket. There, I said, patting his chest. Now you look like a king. Benedict caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. And you, he whispered against my skin, look like trouble. Good, I said, grabbing his arm. Let's go cause some. Chapter 16, The Public Claim. The doors to the grand ballroom were 20 feet high, made of solid mahogany, and currently they were the only thing separating us from 300 of the most powerful shifters in the world. I stood next to Benedict. He offered me his arm. Last chance to run, he murmured. There's a service elevator down the hall. And missed the look on Claudia's face? I tightened my grip on his bicep.
Not a chance. Open the doors. Benedict nodded to the guards. They pulled the handles. The doors swung open. The noise in the room cut off instantly. It was like someone had pulled the plug on a stereo. Hundreds of heads turned. The Red Sea effect happened again, but this time it was absolute. The crowd parted down the middle, creating a wide, terrified path leading straight to the throne-like chairs at the far end. We walked. The silence was suffocating. I could hear the rustle of silk and the sharp intake of breath. Every eye was on me. They were sniffing the air, smelling the fear, the humanity, and the overwhelming scent of the Alpha King that saturated my skin. Halfway down the aisle, a figure stepped out. It was a council member, an old man with gray hair and eyes like flint. He blocked our path. Alpha Hayes, the man said, his voice ringing out. This is irregular. Benedict stopped. He didn't let go of my arm. Irregular, Elder? You bring a human into the inner sanctum, the Elder said, looking at me with cold distaste. "Unmarked, unclaimed, and after the disturbance in the West Wing, there are questions regarding her suitability." Benedict smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found a reason to bite. "Suitability?" Benedict repeated softly. "You question her suitability?" "She is fragile," the elder insisted. "She does not understand our ways. She pulls at tails. She mocks our traditions. She is a liability." Benedict laughed. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You are right," Benedict announced, his voice raising to fill the room. "She does not understand our ways. She thinks our posturing is bad acting. She thinks our growls are poor audio mixing. She treats the Alpha King like a malfunctioning prop." He looked down at me. The warmth in his eyes was blinding. "I have spent 300 years being feared," Benedict said to the room. "I have been obeyed. I have been worshipped, and I have been bored." He looked back at the elder. "This woman walked into a den of wolves and told us to stand up straight. She saw the monster and she didn't run. She asked if I needed a tailor." He turned to face the crowd, his alpha voice booming, vibrating the champagne glasses on the trays. "She does not mock me. She corrects me. She is the only creature on this earth brave enough to hold my leash." He turned back to me, ignoring the stunned council. He took my hand and raised it to his lips. "I claim her," Benedict stated, the power of the words slamming into the room like a physical weight. "Tressa Bastion is my mate, my queen, and the next person who questions her suitability will answer to the wolf." He looked at the elder. "Move." The elder didn't just move, he practically leaped out of the way, bowing low. We walked the rest of the way to the dais in silence. Benedict led me not to the side, but to the chair next to his. He sat me down, then stood beside me, his hand resting on the back of my chair, a visual warning to the room. The music started up again, shaky at first, then louder. The guests began to breathe. I looked up at Benedict. He winked. "Was that too dramatic?" he whispered. "A little," I whispered back, my heart finally restarting. "But the monologue was good. We'll work on the delivery." I looked out at the sea of powerful, terrifying creatures who were now bowing in my direction. "Benedict?" I asked. "Yes, my queen?" "Does this mean I have to plan the Christmas party?" Chapter 17. The Truth. The silence in the penthouse suite was heavier than the roar of the crowd had been. The gala was over. The guests had dispersed, whispering and terrified, leaving us alone in the sudden, ringing quiet of the aftermath. Benedict stood by the fireplace, stripping off his tuxedo jacket with movements that were jerky and uncoordinated. He tossed the garment onto a chair, a bespoke piece of silk worth more than my car, and didn't even look at it. He loosened his tie, the one I had tied for him, and turned to face me. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. "Drink?" he asked, his voice rough. "Water," I said, sinking onto the sofa. "My adrenaline is crashing, and if I have alcohol, I will pass out." He poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher and handed it to me. His fingers brushed mine, electric, hot, and trembling slightly. He didn't sit next to me. He walked to the window, putting the width of the room between us.
"You have questions,"
he stated, staring out at the dark forest. "I have a few," I admitted, taking a sip. "Starting with the biology. You shifted mass. You went from 200 pounds to 300 in seconds. Where does the extra mass come from? And the fur? Is it rapid keratin growth? And the lifespan? You mentioned 3 centuries. Are you immortal?"
Benedict huffed a laugh, turning around. "Of all the questions, you ask about the physics."
"I'm a technical professional," I said, kicking off my boots. "I need to understand the mechanics of the set I'm working on."
"The mechanics," he repeated, his eyes softening. "We are not immortal, Tess, but we are hard to kill. We heal fast, we age slowly. I was born in 1720.
I choked on my water. 1720? You look 30.
I stopped aging at 30, he corrected.
And the bond, the mate bond. He hesitated, looking down at his hands.
It is not just a title. It is a biological imperative. When a wolf finds his mate, his soul tethers to hers. We do not choose it. It chooses us. It is absolute. It is permanent.
He looked up, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made my breath hitch.
For me, there is no one else. There never has been. There never will be. If you leave, I will spend the next eternity alone. That is what the claim means.
The weight of his words settled on my chest. It was terrifying. It was romantic. It was heavier than any prop I had ever carried. "But," Benedict continued, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and walked over to the coffee table, sliding it across the polished wood toward me. "The bond is absolute for me. It does not have to be a prison for you." I looked at the paper. It was a check, a cashier's check. I counted the zeros. It was enough to buy a movie studio. It was enough to buy a small country. "What is this?" I asked, my voice cooling.
"Severance," Benedict said quietly, "and an apology. I claimed you publicly tonight because it was the only way to protect you from the council. If I hadn't claimed you, they would have viewed you as a liability to be removed. But I will not force you to live in a world of monsters. You are human. You deserve sunlight and safety and a life that doesn't involve politicking with warlords." He gestured to the check. "Take it. There is a car waiting downstairs. It will take you to the airfield. The jet is fueled. You can go anywhere, Tess. You can be free."
I stared at the check. Then I stared at him. He was standing there, rigid, heartbreakingly noble, offering to tear his own heart out so I could have a normal life. He was treating our relationship like a contract negotiation, where he was willing to take a total loss. I stood up. I picked up the check. "This is a lot of money," I said.
"It is the least I can do," he murmured, looking away.
"Rip!" The sound was loud in the quiet room. Benedict's head snapped back to me. I tore the check in half again, and again, until the fortune he had offered me was nothing but confetti raining down onto the Persian rug. "I don't want a severance package," I said, stepping over the paper scraps. "I hate it when production tries to buy me out of a contract."
"Tess," he rasped, stepping forward. "You don't understand. It's dangerous."
"I know," I interrupted, closing the distance between us. "I saw the claws. I saw the teeth. I saw the way the room shook when you roared. It's terrifying." I reached up, grabbing his lapels and yanking him down until our faces were inches apart. But here's the thing, Benedict. I've spent my whole life building fake worlds because the real one was too boring. I build monsters out of foam because I wanted to see something magical. And now, I found the real thing. I looked him dead in the eye. You are the only thing I've ever met that I can't measure. You're the only thing I can't control. And I am not walking away from the most interesting project of my life just because you have a martyr complex. It's not a project, he growled, his hands gripping my waist, pulling me flush against him. It's forever. Good, I said, breathless. I'm looking for a long-term engagement, but I have conditions. Benedict blinked, the intensity shifting into confusion. Conditions? 2 conditions, I said, holding up 2 fingers. 1, no more raw meat at dinner. It's gross, and the chewing sound drives me crazy. Cook it to at least medium rare. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. Done. And the second? The East Wing, I said firmly. The velvet drapes are hideous. They look like a vampire funeral home. I get full creative control over the redecoration, and I want to use the budget you just tried to pay me off with. Benedict threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that shook the room. He scooped me up into his arms, spinning me around as I shrieked. You can paint the whole castle pink if you want, he promised, burying his face in my neck. You can burn the drapes. You can rewire the chandeliers. You can do whatever you want. He set me down but didn't let go. He looked at me, his eyes glowing with that beautiful, terrifying gold light. Does this mean, I asked, smoothing his hair back, does this mean I'm the queen? Benedict smirked, leaning in to brush his lips against mine. No, he whispered. It means you're the boss. Chapter 18. Epilogue. 3 months later, I could officially confirm that running a supernatural kingdom was exactly like running a movie set, only with better catering and significantly more growling. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, surveying the autumn equinox gala. The East Wing no longer looked like a vampire's depression den. I had replaced the heavy velvet with cream linen and installed warm lighting that actually allowed people to see who they were talking to. The result was immediate: fewer turf wars, less brooding in corners, and a 40% reduction in accidental furniture breakage. Status report, I murmured into my headset. The appetizers are circulating. Arthur's voice crackled in my ear. He sounded terrified, but efficient. And, Alpha Rider is trying to eat the decorative gourd arrangement on table 5. Tell Ryder if he eats the centerpiece, he's on dish duty for a month, I ordered, adjusting my silk cuff. And tell the string quartet to pick up the tempo. The energy is dragging. Yes, my queen, Arthur squeaked. I smiled. I was still getting used to the titles. Luna, Queen, Mistress of the Clipboard, but mostly, they just called me boss. I walked down the stairs, the heavy train of my emerald gown trailing behind me. As I hit the floor, the crowd parted. It wasn't the fearful scattering I had witnessed 3 months ago. It was a crisp, respectful military formation. Heads bowed, shoulders straightened. I caught the eye of the elder who had tried to block me at the masquerade. He immediately sucked in his gut and fixed his tie. I gave him a nod of approval. He looked relieved enough to cry. I scanned the room for my husband. I found him near the patio doors, trapped in a conversation with a visiting dignitary from the Northern Territories. Benedict looked breathtaking in a tuxedo that I had personally tailored to accommodate his shoulder width. He was nodding politely, but I knew that specific twitch in his jaw. He was bored. He was about 5 seconds away from shifting and eating the dignitary just to end the conversation. I cut through the crowd, my heels clicking on the marble. I didn't announce myself. I simply walked up to Benedict's side and slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. "Ambassador," I said smoothly, flashing my best red carpet smile. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I need to borrow the king. We have a structural crisis in the garden." The ambassador bowed so low his nose nearly touched his knees. "Of course, Your Majesty. Structural integrity is paramount." Benedict turned to me, his golden eyes dancing with relief and amusement. "A structural crisis?" he whispered as we walked away. "Let me guess. The hydrangeas are misaligned?" "Worse," I said, steering him toward the French doors. "The Alpha King looks like he's about to start biting people. And we just had the carpets cleaned." We slipped out into the cool night air. The garden was quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of the fairy lights I had strung through the trees, replacing the ominous iron torches. Benedict inhaled deeply, the tension draining from his shoulders. He pulled me against him, burying his face in my hair. "You smell like freesias," he murmured. "And power. Have I told you how much the pack fears you?" "They don't fear me," I corrected, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. "They respect the clipboard. They know I hold the schedule." "They know you housebroke Ryder," Benedict laughed, kissing my neck. "They think you're a sorceress." "I'm just a woman who likes order," I said, leaning back to look at him. "Go on, run. You've been in meetings all day. You're vibrating." He looked at me, torn. "I can't leave you alone at the gala." "I have a headset and a taser," I reminded him. "I'll be fine. Go. Be a wolf. I'll meet you by the fountain in 10 minutes." He kissed me hard, a searing promise of later, and then stepped into the shadows. I watched the darkness swirl, heard the snap of bone, which I was finally used to, and saw the massive black shape bound into the woods. I waited. I checked my emails. I authorized a budget increase for the kitchen staff. Then I walked to the fountain. He was there. The massive midnight black wolf was sitting perfectly still on the stone ledge, posing like a statue. He was doing it on purpose. He was mimicking the exact position he had been in the day we met. I suppressed a smile and approached him. I circled him slowly, tapping my chin. I said loud enough for him to hear. "The fur texture is much better this time."